tonight's talk is the speaker is well known to most of you, I think, because he's done a few talks before. He's done one on Glen Buck. He's done one on Glen Buck, and you did one about the River Aire and Burns. Is that all? Just two? Seems like more. Anyway, and he's lived, although he's a Cumnock boy, he's lived in the valley for the last 45 years, so he does a lot of walking as well. So, with no further hesitation, I'll hand you over to your speaker for tonight. McMeekin, I think quite well.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my wee talk about the historic buildings of the Irvine Valley. Now, as Kay said, I've been here a couple of times before and talking about Robert Burns and the River Aire Way and Glen Buck, and most of my walks are centred around the walking that I do. And tonight's going to be no different, because I'm going to take you for a walk up the Irvine Valley. A friend of mine said to me recently, or asked me recently, what does the Irvine Valley actually consist of? Her idea was that it started at Loudoun Hill and went all the way to Irvine Harbour. And of course, that's totally wrong. The Irvine Valley starts or finishes at Hurlford and Crooked Home. And that's where I'm going to start tonight. If I can work this thing.
I know I haven't put the thing in. Sorry. Give me a minute.
Can you go start? Can you go start?
Plug the wee bit in. But I'll do it manually just now while I figure this out. Where's my brief?
Right, I'm going to start with this. Ironically enough, and of course it's not a building. This is the propeller that you'll find down at Hurlford Cross. The building that this comes from is situated about 100 yards along the Galston Road. And the Vulcan foundry that produced things like this was established around 1890. And Andrew Strang and company increasingly moved towards producing castings for naval purposes. During the First World War, and production of propellers increased dramatically during the Second World War, with record numbers of them leaving Hurlford for shipping built for the war effort. The company produced several propellers that were used in the landing craft for D-Day. So this is an important part of the industrial history of Hurlford. Still not working.
I know I haven't got it plugged in yet. I'm looking on it.
Right, and we cross the road from where the propeller sits, and this is the bridge that separates Hurlford from Crooked Home. And this is looking up the Irvine, and I aim to take you up the left-hand side. That's where the path is. Irvine Valley, Hurlford, Galston, New Mills, Darvel. When I moved into the valley, it's more than 50 years ago now, the water wasn't as clean as that. Well, over the past 10, 20 years, with the demise, I've got to say, of the factories in the valley, right, the water is spotless now. And you get a great chance, if you're walking up the valley, of seeing otters, kingfishers, herons by the dozen. The salmon and the trout have returned to the Irvine, so it's a good sign. Maybe bad for the industry of the valley, but it's certainly a good sign for the river here.
It should be working now.
Can I not just use that?
I think you're going to have to.
Right, so I'm using this now.
Yeah, but you could still use your wee pointer.
Oh, I need my wee pointer, right. Right, as we walk up the valley, on the left-hand side of the Irvine, About an hour and 10 minutes into the walk, we come to Loudoun Kirk. And Loudoun Kirk has been there for centuries. Loudoun Kirk dates back to 1451, when Lady Ayrshire of Loudoun Castle granted the land to the monks of Kilwinning, or Kilwinning Abbey, in memory of her late husband, Sir John Campbell of Loudoun. It was the first parish church in the district. Later in the 17th century, the parish kirk was moved up the valley a bit to Newmilns, and very soon after that, the Kirk of Loudoun, Loudoun Kirk, was no longer necessary, no longer used, and it soon fell into disrepair. And that is a favourite picture of mine, because many, many times I've had my lunch there. And Jimmy, who's a fellow walker with me, likewise. There are interesting tombstones, for those of you who like to sketch around graveyards, there are interesting tombstones in the graveyard. And one of them is to the Covenanter called Thomas Fleming of Loudoun Hill, who died from wounds received at the Battle of Drumclog in 1679. And there's a one to a lady called Janet Little. Some of you might have heard of Janet Little. Janet Little was known under the sobriquet the Scottish milkmaid. And she corresponded with Robert Burns. In fact, addressed a poem to Robert Burns. In the middle, you'll see an obelisk there. Right? And there's also this tall obelisk in the centre of the picture, which was erected to the memory of the beautiful but tragic Lady Flora Hastings. And she was a member of the Loudoun family who died in 1839 from abdominal complications, and she was the innocent victim of slander in the court of Queen Victoria. Now, I'm going to come back to her in a few minutes. You can see how old the graveyard is with the example on the right-hand side there. Oh. This one. And this is Loudoun Kirk village, situated right next to Loudoun Kirk itself. It no longer exists, but in days gone by, it was so picturesque that photographers from all over Scotland, and indeed artists from all over Scotland, came to paint it or to photograph it. Who lived there? It belonged to Loudoun Estate. And the people who were employed there, probably as gardeners, foresters, gamekeepers, stable hands, and labourers, while the women and young ladies, they worked as maids and servants within the castle itself. This row of thatched cottages lasted till about the Second World War, but there is not a single stone to be found nowadays. Not even a foundation stone, nothing. It has disappeared completely. And then, of course, talking about Loudoun, there is absolutely no way you could mention Loudoun or the name of Loudoun without talking about Loudoun Castle. Loudoun Castle stands on a gentle slope about a mile northeast of Galston. It was the ancestral home of the Campbells of Loudoun. And one of its square towers with a battlement was erected around the 12th or 13th century. That's how old it is. Around about 1811, the castle was redesigned by the Countess of Loudoun and her husband, the second Earl of Moira, and it became one of the grandest mansions in the west of Scotland. I think this even beats Culzean. However, the only picture I can give you tonight is a very old one before the castle fell into ruins. It's now surrounded, you might have seen it in the initial photograph I put up, it's now surrounded by that ugly fencing that seems to prevail everywhere nowadays, and you can't get near the place. So I think you'll agree, an absolutely beautiful building. It was known as the Windsor of Scotland. And it had 90 rooms, a library containing 10,000 volumes. It had 28 turrets. And the arms of the Crawfords of Loudoun with the motto, "I bide my time," is inscribed into one of the walls. Near the south front of the castle is an old yew tree, and I've sat under that yew tree a couple of times, but can't get near it now, as I say, for this ugly fencing. There grows a yew tree, and reputedly, it's over 800 years old. And under the branches of which one of the family charters was signed in the time of William the Lion. In 1941, the castle was destroyed beyond repair by a fire, and it's now in ruins. I'm led to believe that at that particular time, the castle had passed into the hands of a trust, and the trust had not paid their insurance premium for 18 months, and hence the castle fell into ruins. I don't have a picture of this, but to the right-hand side, which would be to the east side of the castle here, there was the Golf Club. And golf has been played at Loudoun Castle for the best part of 400 years. And if I go along the A71, those of you who know the area, you'll know that Loudoun Golf Club still exists. I'm very proud of the fact that Loudoun Golf Club, which was instituted about 1909, was one of the first golf clubs in Scotland to allow women to play. And one of the first competitions they ever had was a ladies' competition in 1909. You consider what it was like in some golf clubs at that particular time. I'm sorry, I'm mentioning places like Turnberry, which was men only, hadn't allowed women in for decades after that. Royal Troon, I think, was the same, right? Very much a misogynistic sport, I've got to say, in years gone by.
And yet,
So,
Mary Queen of Scots played golf.
sorry?
Mary Queen of Scots played golf.
Correct. Correct.
Only in later years that men decided women shouldn't get in.
So, the golf club can lay claim to being the oldest golf club in Scotland. It's certainly the most unique because it's the only golf, G-O-W-F, spelled with the old spelling of golf, the old Scots spelling. It's unique and it's the only golf club in Scotland. And now we move across the bridge at Galston onto the other side of the Irvine. And if there's one building that I would recommend you visit, if you want to go and visit some of the buildings I'll show you this evening, I would recommend this to be number one on your list. This is the Bar Castle in Galston. Bar Castle is the oldest building in Galston. It's a fortified tower house, and it was built by the Lockharts of Bar in the 15th century. Inside there are 3 rooms. On the ground floor, middle floor, and the top one. And these are connected by a spiral staircase. How they got away with the fire regulations, I don't know, because it would be very dangerous if you were up the top there and a fire on the bottom floor. Anyway, inside there are 3 rooms connected by a single spiral stairway, and at one time the tower was surmounted with battlements. The Calvinist reformers, George Wishart and John Knox, preached within the confines of its protective walls in 1545 and 1556, respectively. In the 17th century, ownership passed to the Campbells of Cessna. Cessna Castle is on the other side of Galston on the Swan Road. But it became unoccupied at the conclusion of the Covenanting period. Thereafter, believe it or not, it was used as a cholera hospital. It was used as a jail. And it was used as a wood store. But the thing most people in Galston would like to tell you about, there was a game of handball played here, and it's unique to Galston. And the Galston players were considered the champions of the world. And each year on a Glasgow Fair Friday, or Saturday, I beg your pardon, large crowds thronged around the tower to watch the players compete for the Silver Challenge Cup. The games are no longer played today, but the tower itself has been carefully restored and preserved by the local Masonic Lodge, which is St. Peter 331, who have created not only on the bottom floor an entrance hall and a function room, and the Masonic Lodge is in the middle, and it must be one of the plushest Masonic lodges in Scotland. It is absolutely beautiful and worth seeing. The best time to see it, of course, is in the Open Doors Day, and that's when Kay and I have been down to see it on a couple of occasions. Up on the top, believe it or not, there's a museum, and the Masons look after it very well. In this museum, and I wish I had hours to spend just to go around and have a look at all the stuff that's there. There's the handball artefacts from the old game. There's what's known as Burnon stones. Now, the burn that flows through the centre of Galston is called Burn Ann, but the locals don't pronounce it that way, they pronounce it Burnon. And it was famous for semi-precious stones. You could go up the burn and collect semi-precious stones, and that's an example in the Bar Castle Museum of the Burnon agate. Very pretty. I've seen it many times. There's mining collections in the museum as well, because Galston was at one time a mining community. There are swords, muskets, pistols, whatever have you. There's even a police display up in the top floor. Historical books, and because of course it's a Masonic lodge, you'll have Masonic regalia. I'm also led to believe, I don't know whether Dane Love can help me out in this, but there was a window in the manse in New Mills which was etched by Robert Burns. I believe the repair shop that used to be in the telly took that away, got it repaired, and I believe the Masons now look after that in their museum. Any knowledge of that? Is that the case? Yeah. Okay, moving on. We walk up the valley from Galston to New Mills along what's known as the Strath, till we come to New Mills. And here we have the old New Mills Toon Council House. It's in rather shabby condition at the moment because nobody seems to be looking after it. History. The old council house, more or less just up from the crossing New Mills, was built in 1739 and has for a long time been at the centre of the town's civic activity. It was built by the 4th Earl of Loudoun to house the Town Council of the borough of Barney. It has a belfry. And it also has 2 sets of stairs. At the top of the stairs, although it doesn't look like it, there's a wee landing there. And many, according to the history books, many an oration has been given from the top of these stairs. The bell in the tower actually predates that building by almost 200 years. The building was built in 1739 and the date on the bell is 1547, but nobody seems to know where it originated from. I'll use a quote here. The upstairs was used as I beg your pardon, was used as a court and a council chamber, while the lower story was a toll booth in there and a court for the imprisonment and warding of delinquents and other vagrants. And I've come across a list of cases which were heard at the court on one day in July 1895. And it reads as follows. It gives an insight into the business. Jeanie Aird of Isle Street in New Mills was fined a sum of 5 shillings for being drunk and incapable. 2 men were given the choice of a 2 and 6pence fine or 24 hours in the jail for breaking telegraph cups on the Darvel Road. And a trio of boys from the High Street were also charged with the theft of strawberries from a garden, but were allowed to go after a severe reprimand. See that incident there? That takes me back to an incident when I stayed in Craigen's place up in the Hurlford. This is about 1955. And my lifetime friend George, he stayed at the bottom of the cul-de-sac and I stayed near the top. And one particular year, George's father had a massive planting of strawberries. Unfortunately, one weekend he went away for a couple of nights away, and when they come back, wasn't a strawberry to be seen. And the suspicion fell on 2 families in Holmburn Road, the McDonalds and the Cardys, and if you know the Cardy family, they pronounce it Cardy. Suspicion fell on them and the Jollies up at the top of the cul-de-sac. But it was only about 20 years ago I had to tell George, it wasn't the McDonalds, it wasn't the Cardys, it wasn't the Jollies, it was me. Language is terrible today. Right, moving on. I hope I've got the right picture here. Yeah. The 3 buildings in this picture are significant. The big building on the left is the Loudoun Arms, and I don't know whether you can see it there, but that said the Loudoun Arms. I'll show you a close-up of that one in a minute, and I'll show you that wee square thing there in a minute or two. But one of the things, I'll start with a bit on the gable end of the building of the Loudoun Arms. Over the past year, some artists have been assigned to paint some murals on the buildings in the valley. And that's one with a, it's hard to see from this angle, but it's a lace worker working on lace. The building at the back is the Keep in New Mills. And because it's up that wee side street, even a lot of people that have stayed in New Mills for a long, long while don't know that exists. This building here, I'll just go on to it. Right, to take the wee one, on this site, this is on the side of the Loudoun Arms Hotel. On this site, on 17th of March 1786, Robert Burns was made a member of Lodge Loudoun Winning 51, known locally as LKN 51. There, I don't know whether you can make it out, I bide my time, spelled with Y's, and that, of course, is the motto of the Loudoun family, the Loudoun Arms. When I moved into the valley all these years ago, more than 50, I think it was about 56 years ago now this year, this was the Clydesdale Bank. Do you remember when we used to have banks in wee towns like New Mills, like Darvel and Galston? And now it's the dentist. But this is an important building too, because this is where the local weaver, Darvel and New Mills, held their meetings. And at the time of the American Civil War, that's in the 1860s, the people of New Mills suffered badly because of a shortage of cotton from America, due to the blockade of the southern cotton ports, as you would understand. This resulted in a severe fall in the output from their looms, and the consequent hardship affected nearly everyone in the valley. But despite this, and I think this is to the credit of the New Mills folk at the time, and which today a lot of New Mills folk are very proud of this fact, Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, and his policy of the abolition of slavery were staunchly supported by the New Mills weavers. Even though it affected their income, their pockets, they supported the abolition of slavery very much indeed. In fact, as an expression of appreciation, it's said that Abraham Lincoln himself sent an American flag to the New Mills Anti-Slavery Society. But over the years, this flag got lost and nobody could trace it. However, at New Mills Civic Week, way back in 1949, a representative of the US government presented a replacement flag to the civic dignitaries of the day, in other words, the town council of the day. That flag seems to have disappeared as well. I've tried to trace it myself. It used to be in the old parish kirk, which is shut now, so I don't know who's got it, right? Which is very sad. Moving on. Back to New Mills Keep. Just as the Bar Castle is the oldest building in Galston, folks, the oldest building in New Mills is this fortified tower house in Castle Street. And as I say, lots of people have never seen it because it's up a side street. It's of significant architectural and historical interest and was maintained for many years by the owners of the adjacent Loudoun Arms, the pub that I just showed you. It was built in the 16th century, and in 1685, while being used as barracks for dragoons, and as a prison for Covenanters. It was attacked by local men who released 8 Covenanter prisoners. That information I got from Dane Love's book on the Covenanters. Since then, believe it or not, it's been used as a grain store, a ducat, a band hall for New Mill Silver Band, and it's been a beer cellar, obviously, for the pub next door. But a couple of years ago, in the open doors day, Kay and I, the keep in New Mills is open, let's go down and see inside it then. But we didn't know that a family was living in it. And we were rather embarrassed, the pair of us, to be traipsing through Sunday's living room in their bedroom. I don't know whether it's still the same family that's in it today, but it's still being used by a family as a dwelling house. Right, when they extended the railway line from Galston, from New Mills up to Darvel, this necessitated building a viaduct right through New Mills Green. And believe it or not, this viaduct has 26 arches. Can you imagine the cost of building that today? I'm just passing over this very quickly. That's just another view on a different day. Right through the green, the River Irvine is down here somewhere. I said we've had mural painters up in the valley, and to me this is an absolutely gorgeous piece of work. Right, stands next to the War Memorial, and I'll bring it up a wee bit closer. Look how intricate that is on the gable end of what used to be the butcher's shop. The motto of the Valley Weavers was "Weave truth with trust." And you'll see that elsewhere, and there's a monument just halfway to Darvel, and that's on it as well, "Weave truth with trust." How they managed to replicate that, I have no idea whatsoever. That is absolutely superb. Now, when I was at Loudoun Kirk, I showed you the obelisk, which is to the memory of Lady Flora. This is Lady Flora's Institute. Who was Lady Flora then? To give you a wee bit more information, and the following story about her life could fill an evening of its own. Lady Flora, or to give her her full name, Lady Flora Elizabeth Hastings, was the daughter of the first Marquess of Hastings and a member of the Loudoun family. She was brought up in Loudoun Castle, and eventually she was appointed Lady of the Bedchamber to the Duchess of Kent. Now, the Duchess of Kent at that time, she was the mother of Queen Victoria. A cruel and unfounded slander was circulated within the Queen's court that Lady Flora was pregnant, when in fact she had an infected liver with severe intestinal complications resulting in a swollen appearance, from which she died. And because she believed all the gossip and tittle-tattle in the palace, Victoria, the Queen, the Empress of the British Empire, was vilified by the general public when the real truth became known. imagine, you know, this is in an age of royal sycophancy and forelock tugging. She was vilified by the general public when the truth about Lady Flora eventually came to light. She was hissed at in public, Victoria, Queen Victoria. If she rode through Hyde Park, she rode through in silence. People turned their backs on her. And when Lady Flora's, or when the funeral of Lady Flora took place, shouts of murderer were heard, and a volley of stones was thrown at the royal carriage. Can you imagine that even nowadays? However, what about this building? After her death, after Lady Flora's death, her sister, the Marchioness of Bute, bequested £12,000 to build a school for girls in her memory. And this is that school. In 1919, however, all the girls were transferred to the new public school. And it then opened as a women's institute. But it closed in 1981. And very soon after that, that building fell into serious disrepair. Fortunately, however, it has been restored to its former magnificence and is now in use as a retirement home for the elderly. That's the story of Lady Flora. There's much more to it than that, but obviously time does not permit me to. Right. And now we move up from New Mills to Darvel. And there's a sight that greeted me when I came to the valley at first. Nothing but factories. I believe when I arrived there were something like 18 mills and factories in Darvel alone and 10 in New Mills. There's hardly one left. None of that, Jimison and Company, none of that exists. None of that exists. None of that there exists. There's a wee corner up here which is still taken by a firm that produces sports clothing. They're still in the go. But all the factories in New Mills and Darvel have seen better. They've had it. Of course, that's why there's no effluent now going into the River Irvine, and that's why it's so clean. I'm pretty sure that some of you sitting here this evening have an example, maybe at home, and certainly my mother had, of Darvel lace. Darvel lace was famous worldwide. The factories were makers of fine lace and madras curtains, and they even weaved tapestries in the form of curtains, table covers, and antimacassars. The handloom weavers, of course, they were squeezed out by the factories. But as I say, Darvel lace, really world famous. The final mural, oh, not quite, no, I haven't reached that yet. This is Lanfine House, spelled L-A-N-F-I-N-E, but not pronounced Lanfine, it's pronounced Lanfine. Right, and the father-in-law of Robert Burns, i.e. James Armour, the master mason of Mauchline, built the central part of Lanfine House. He was also responsible for adding some buildings to Cessnock Castle that I've mentioned earlier. And Armour was contracted to build Lanfine House between roughly 1769 and 1772. John Brown, who was a textile manufacturer and a banker within the city of Glasgow, was the original owner of the house. And the name Brown is all over the valley, the Browns Road and Browns. It's a very famous name in the valley. Now, Brown gained enough wealth to buy the original land upon which the house itself was built. The policies were planted with many beautiful trees and shrubs, and 3 gatehouses were also built to give access. The one in Darble, that's the East Lodge. The one in New Mills, the Middle Lodge, which is private, they don't allow you to use it. And then on the other side, the West Lodge. 3 big long drives. The locals call them avenues, and I have walked them countless times over the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Beautiful walk. They breed wild boar in the grounds, although they're not very wild, I've got to be honest. You take a piece out your hand if you were, you know. They used to breed red deer, that's no longer the case. But as you wander up through the estate, you'll see peacocks, you'll see white doves, lots of roe deer still milling about in the wood. And it's just a fabulous place to walk. And the locals make lots of use of it. Although the estate rose up to, I think, about 37,000 acres, as I say, but it's much, much reduced in size. And in 2001, the estate went up for sale at offers over 3 million. Imagine what it would be now. It was bought by a German family called Sasse, S-A-S-S-E, and they're still the owners today. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but they tend to be absentee landlords. Although the estate's still well looked after by the workers that they employ, they tend to be absentee landlords, and they come over 2 or 3 times a year, and they just treat Lanfine House as a holiday house. But it's a superb part of the valley to go to. I've got a list of all the rooms, but that's quite boring. Right, the other mural is, of course, to Darvill's most famous son, Sir Alexander Fleming, who, because of his discovery of penicillin, has saved countless millions upon millions of lives. There's not a wee museum in Darvel, much to the disgrace of the local people. There should be a museum to this man for his contribution to world medicine. I'm not as enamoured with this mural as I am with the other 2 with the lace. This is too much like a photograph. I'd rather the artist had given his own impression of Alexander Fleming, but it's still a very, very clever mural. Just before we get to that, you have to go up onto the old railway, and the old railway, well, I need to go back a wee bit. Next up, can you help me?
Done. Do you know what you've done? Oh, this is it, setting up your doofer now. A bit late. A bit late. Share. We'll serve. There we are.
Okay, that's
Is that the right bit?
Forward.
Forward.
Right, up to Alexander Fleming.
Wait a minute. Wait. Play, pause. It's not play. There's play. Play. There we go. Got it. You to share, yes. Okay.
Right, you'll notice, by the way, I forgot to point out that just above all the factories, between the factories there's the old railway line. Of course, Dr. Beeching shut that down in 1964 or 65, whenever. You'll notice too, Darwell had a turntable. I think the run for the trains was Ardrossan to Darwell and back. And they always turned the train around in Darwell, and that was the old turntable there. The line was eventually extended right up the valley to Straven. You imagine the cost of that, and it only lasted 19 years. The whole line only lasted 19 years before buses and lorries, it became uneconomical. Before I cut up onto the old railway, it's not there anymore, so I can't show you a picture of it. But there's a famous song, and I'm sure most of you have heard of it. If you remember somebody called Joe Gordon, who used to sing folk songs, and I listened to it tonight before I came up, and it's called, of course, the Derval Dam. I'll just do a wee bit. I'm not going to sing it, by the way. As I get out here Lammasnicht, just to hear a wee bit stroll, I didn't donner very far, just down the length of the toll. I donner on till Derval Dam I did pass. And what do you think was standing there? But a bonny wee servant lass. Where are you going? Give me your horn. How'd you do, says I. Hold up your head, my bonny wee lass, and then be looking so shy. Come tell me your name, will your father no be angry now? If I was to see you, go into YouTube, you'll be able to get that. I'm singing up Derval Dam. The old railway line, as I say, went to Straven, but only for a short period of time. But it necessitated building this. Now, the viaduct in New Mills has 26 arches. This is 13. And when the line was shut in the 80s, they decided they would give this to the Army, whatever it is, Ordnance Corps, as an exercise in how to blow up a building. Much to the consternation and annoyance of the locals. They didn't want it, they wanted it kept as a walk. Right? And it seemingly was so difficult to blow up, right, that they struggled to get rid of that. Of course, it's gone now. It was a feature in the landscape, and I don't think it harmed the landscape in any way, shape, or form. I forgot to say, we're looking at our destination. It looks as if it's just at the end of the street, Loudoun Hill. That's where we're headed for. And eventually, we get to Loudoun Hill itself. And a lot of the young folk in Darwell, New Mills, Galston do not know that there was a station at Loudoun Hill. And that's it. It's the only picture I've ever found of the station at Loudoun Hill. And then just to finish off, there we are at the top of the valley. You've gone for a 9-mile walk from Hurlford up to the top of the valley. Now, the reason I included this particular picture, I had nothing to do with it. This was a picture taken with my good lady wife here, and I think she either had it published in the centre pages of the Herald once, or she won a BBC competition or something like that. But I can see why it's an absolutely cracking picture. The Irvine was just down there, and it's just a wee burn. At that particular time, it's a wee burn. A fortnight ago, between there and 4 miles down, that burn became an absolutely raging torrent, right, in the space of 4 miles. Ladies and gentlemen, that sort of concludes my wee talk in the Irvine Valley I hope some of it has been of interest to you, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Found it on, here we are. I found it in Apple Music.
I hadna gone but very far, down by the Darrow Pool. I done, and done, and done, till the Darrow dam it was past. When what do you think was standing there but a bonny wee country lass?